Some people can spend a day online without posting a thing about themselves. Their profile stays quiet, their stories remain empty, yet they watch everything unfolding, observing a world that asks to be seen everywhere. There is something fascinating about that silence. While millions document meals, friendships, achievements, opinions, celebrations, and moments, some people leave almost no trace behind. They may scroll, respond privately, or observe, but rarely broadcast themselves. At first, the explanation seems obvious. Maybe they are shy. Maybe they have nothing interesting to share. Maybe they simply do not care about social media. But those explanations become less convincing when you notice how different they can be. Because refusing to post is not always about having nothing to say. Sometimes, it reveals how someone experiences attention, identity, privacy, and connection. So what is happening inside someone who watches the world but chooses silence? Perhaps the more interesting question is not why someone refuses to post, but what they believe posting would actually accomplish. What really changes when a private experience suddenly becomes visible to hundreds of other people? Social media turns ordinary moments into signals. A photograph can say, "I am happy." A story can say, "I am busy." A celebration can quietly communicate success. Even silence can become a form of communication. So when someone repeatedly chooses not to participate, it is tempting to interpret that silence through familiar ideas. Maybe they dislike attention. Maybe they fear judgment. Maybe they prefer living privately. But none explains everyone. Psychology becomes fascinating when the same behavior can emerge from completely different inner worlds. One person may protect privacy, another avoid comparison, another see no reason to perform their life. The real question is why? It's easy to assume that people who rarely post are private by nature. Sometimes they are. But privacy alone cannot explain why some happily consume social media while resisting visibility. Others assume they must be insecure, antisocial, or disconnected. That can feel convincing because posting involves exposure, yet someone can be confident, active, and connected without maintaining public visibility online. But that's not the full picture. Posting is not merely sharing information. It can involve managing impressions, anticipating reactions, comparing yourself with others, and deciding which version deserves display publicly. For some people, that process feels unnecessary. Their identity may not depend heavily on being witnessed. They can experience something meaningful without immediately converting it into something others can see, and this is where the behavior becomes psychologically interesting. Silence may have less to do with avoiding people and more to do with separating private experience from public identity online. One important mechanism here is impression management, the psychological process of controlling how other people perceive us. Whenever we post, we make choices about what to reveal, what to hide, and what image our audience receives from us publicly online. Most people do this automatically. Before uploading a picture, they may consider how it looks, who might respond, whether the moment seems impressive, or whether the post matches the person they believe themselves to be in that exact moment internally. For someone who rarely posts, that entire mental process may simply feel unnecessary, exhausting, or disconnected from their priorities. They might prefer experiences that remain experiences rather than becoming performances designed for an audience they may never personally meet online. That does not mean they never care what people think. Humans naturally notice social feedback. But when external visibility becomes less important, attention can shift toward experiencing life directly, without constantly translating moments into something worthy of display for others. That shift eventually touches something deeper than social media: identity. The question becomes not simply whether someone wants attention, but whether they need an audience to feel that their experiences are real, valuable, or meaningful to themselves at all personally. Some people build identity through visible expression. Their photographs, opinions, achievements, and daily updates become pieces of a story they tell about who they are. Others construct that story internally, through memories, private goals, conversations, and quiet personal experiences alone. This difference can exist without confidence or insecurity being the deciding factor. A person might feel completely comfortable with themselves while simply believing that every meaningful part of life does not need public confirmation or permanent digital evidence online. And perhaps that explains why certain people can disappear from social media without feeling that they have disappeared from the world. Their sense of self remains anchored somewhere deeper, where being known by themselves matters more than being noticed by everyone else. Social media becomes powerful when other people's reactions start influencing how we evaluate ourselves. A like, comment, or view can feel like tiny evidence that our presence matters to someone else. That feedback can gradually become something we expect. A successful post brings attention, while a quiet one can feel disappointing. Without realizing it, people may begin measuring moments by the response they receive afterward. For someone who rarely posts, that cycle may hold less importance. They may still enjoy recognition, but their sense of worth does not depend as heavily on strangers, acquaintances, or followers responding to their private experiences. Yet social pressure can still exist beneath the silence. Friends may ask why someone never posts, relatives may expect updates, and entire social circles can make visibility feel like an unspoken requirement. The fascinating difference is what happens when someone stops treating that expectation as a command. They begin discovering that approval can be pleasant without becoming necessary, and that distinction can quietly change their relationship with attention. When someone begins questioning that expectation, something subtle can change. The absence of posting stops feeling like withdrawal and starts becoming a deliberate choice about where attention belongs in their life each day and gradually. Instead of asking, "Will people notice this?" they may begin asking a different question: "Do I actually want to share this?" That small shift moves the decision inward, away from automatic social pressure and expectation. Psychologically, this can represent a growing awareness of habit. Behaviors repeated often can feel natural simply because they are familiar. Once the pattern becomes visible, people gain an opportunity to choose differently with greater intention. But awareness does not automatically create peace. Sometimes stepping away reveals how strongly attention has shaped us. And once that influence becomes visible, another question appears: what happens when validation is no longer the goal? One useful concept here is self-determination. The idea that people function better when choices feel internally motivated rather than controlled by outside expectations. It helps explain voluntary personal silence. Autonomy means experiencing yourself as the author of your decisions. When posting becomes something you obligated to do, an upload can feel like another demand. Choosing silence can restore ownership. This does not mean avoiding social media automatically creates independence. Someone can stop posting while still obsessing over perception. The difference is whether the decision comes from preference or pressure. For some people, not posting becomes a boundary. Their life remains visible to themselves and close people, while strangers receive less access. That boundary creates space between experience and evaluation, and that space matters because identity becomes easier to hear when external reactions become quieter. Without waiting for anyone, someone has room to discover what they enjoy, value, and remember. For some people, the decision not to post comes from experiences that changed how visibility feels. Perhaps something once shared received unwanted attention, criticism, misunderstanding, or a reaction they never expected from other people watching from the outside online publicly. For others, there may be no dramatic event at all. They simply became tired of explaining themselves, comparing their lives, or feeling that ordinary moments needed to become content before they could feel meaningful enough on their own. Emotional exhaustion can also play a role. When life already feels demanding, maintaining an online version of yourself can become another responsibility. Silence then becomes less about hiding and more about conserving emotional energy for things that truly matter personally. But there is an important distinction. Not everyone who stays quiet is protecting a wound, avoiding judgment, or recovering from disappointment. Sometimes the person has simply learned that meaningful experiences feel better when they remain theirs, untouched by interpretation entirely. Not posting does not necessarily mean someone dislikes attention. Sometimes it means they prefer attention that feels personal, intentional, and connected to real relationships rather than reactions from an audience. Silence also does not necessarily mean insecurity. A person can feel comfortable with themselves while deciding that private experiences do not require public approval, explanation, or documentation for other people. Sometimes the opposite is true. Someone may post constantly because visibility feels reassuring, while another person posts rarely because they already feel secure without continuous confirmation from others around them. But there is another possibility. A person may avoid posting because visibility feels uncomfortable, exposing fears about judgment, comparison, or rejection. The same behavior can come from different psychological places. That complexity changes how we interpret silence. The absence of a post tells us almost nothing by itself. To understand the person, we have to look beyond what they withhold. Perhaps this is why social media raises a larger philosophical question about identity. How much of ourselves belongs to the world, and how much should remain untouched by other people's expectations and interpretations around us? Privacy is not simply the absence of sharing. It can represent freedom from constant observation, the freedom to experience something without immediately turning it into evidence of who you are or what your life means. In a culture where visibility can feel almost synonymous with existence, choosing not to display yourself becomes quietly significant. It suggests that being present and being publicly visible are not necessarily the same experience. Maybe that is the deeper tension. We live surrounded by opportunities to announce ourselves, yet some parts of being human become meaningful because nobody else is watching. Can we still value moments without an audience? Relationships reveal another layer because people who rarely post are not necessarily less connected. They may simply value conversations, shared experiences, and private communication more than public displays of closeness. A birthday message sent privately can carry more meaning than public reactions. A long conversation can become part of a relationship without ever becoming evidence that the relationship exists online. Yet this can create misunderstandings. Friends may interpret silence as distance, while the quiet person may feel connected. The difference comes from how each person defines connection, recognition, and presence. Social media can make relationships visible, but visibility and intimacy are different things. Someone can know your favorite song, understand your fears, and remember details without ever appearing beside you. And perhaps that is why connection feels different in private. When nobody is performing closeness for an audience, attention can move toward the person themselves rather than the relationship appears. There is also a neurological side to this pattern. Social platforms are designed around feedback, and notifications, likes, comments, and views can repeatedly capture attention by providing unpredictable moments of social reward to the brain. This does not mean every notification creates an addiction, or that everyone responds identically. But variable rewards can make behaviors particularly persistent because the next response is uncertain, encouraging people to check again and anticipate what might appear. Over time, posting can become connected with attention itself. A person shares something, waits for reactions, checks again, and learns that visibility can produce emotional stimulation. Eventually, the behavior may happen automatically rather than deliberately. Someone who rarely posts may interrupt that cycle, intentionally or simply because they never developed the habit strongly. Their attention remains less tied to public feedback, creating more distance between personal experience, online reaction, and emotional response. Still, it would be a mistake to romanticize silence. Not everyone who avoids posting has achieved some higher level of independence, privacy, or emotional stability. Sometimes silence is connected to fear, discomfort, or avoidance. Someone may worry about being judged, misunderstood, compared, or rejected. They might want to share something but repeatedly stop themselves because visibility feels emotionally risky. From the outside, that can look like confidence. There are also people who withdraw when social interaction becomes overwhelming. They may reduce their online presence because they feel exhausted, anxious, or simply unable to manage another space where expectations continue arriving. So the absence of posting cannot tell us whether someone is peaceful or struggling. The behavior only becomes meaningful when we understand the motivation underneath it, and that motivation can change across different periods of life. The turning point begins when someone becomes curious about their own reasons. Instead of automatically posting or avoiding posting, they start noticing what they feel before, during, and after choosing either action. That awareness creates distance between impulse and decision. A person might realize they were sharing because they wanted reassurance, or staying silent because they feared judgment. Neither discovery makes them weak. It simply makes the pattern visible. With that visibility comes a different kind of freedom. They can decide what deserves to be shared, what deserves privacy, and which reactions actually matter without automatically allowing every outside response to shape their behavior. This does not mean becoming completely indifferent to others. Human beings need connection, recognition, and belonging. The healthier shift is understanding that these needs do not have to be satisfied through constant public visibility. Eventually, social media becomes a choice rather than a psychological command. And when that happens, the question is no longer whether someone is being seen, but whether they are living according to themselves. Authenticity enters the picture when someone begins separating who they are from who they believe they should appear to be. Social media can blur that boundary by rewarding certain versions of identity more than others. Someone might look confident online while privately feeling uncertain, or appear constantly available while actually craving solitude. The gap between presentation and inner experience can become tiring when maintaining it requires continuous attention every day. For someone who posts rarely, that gap may simply feel unnecessary. They may prefer an identity that remains consistent whether anyone is watching or not, rather than adapting themselves to whatever receives approval from others. Because the deepest question is not whether you show yourself. It is whether the person you present resembles the person you actually experience when the audience disappears and nothing needs to be proven to anyone. Think about a quiet morning when your phone stays across the room. Nothing needs to be photographed, explained, or approved, and suddenly an ordinary moment can truly feel complete again. Coffee tastes like coffee. Rain becomes something you notice against the window. A conversation becomes something you remember rather than document, and attention returns to where you physically are again. In those moments, presence becomes less about doing more, and more about noticing what was already there. The world stops competing with an imagined audience, and experience becomes immediate again. Someone who rarely posts may have discovered this accidentally or intentionally. Their most meaningful moments might exist where no algorithm can reach, carried through memory, conversation, sensation, and quiet reflection. And perhaps that is what makes silence powerful. It leaves certain experiences untouched, allowing them to exist without becoming performances. Sometimes, being fully present requires nothing to be shared afterward. From the outside, however, silence can be misunderstood. Someone who never posts may be labeled boring, secretive, antisocial, or strangely disconnected simply because their life is not regularly displayed online. But visibility is an unreliable measure of personality. A quiet profile cannot show how deeply someone loves their friends, how ambitious they are, or how much happens beyond the screen. Society has gradually become comfortable treating public evidence as proof. If something is photographed, announced, or celebrated online, it feels more real. If nothing appears, people sometimes assume nothing happened. Yet an invisible life can still be incredibly full. There can be friendships nobody sees, achievements nobody announces, and moments that become important precisely because they were never turned into public performances. And this brings us back to the mystery from the beginning. Perhaps the person who posts nothing is not absent from the social world at all. Perhaps they simply refuse to measure existence through visibility. Why do people choose not to post on social media? The deeper answer is that silence can represent many psychological realities, from autonomy and privacy to fear, exhaustion, or disinterest. What matters is not the empty profile itself, but their relationship with attention. Some need visibility to feel connected, while others feel connected without turning experiences into public evidence online. For some, refusing to post protects identity from constant evaluation. For others, it protects emotional energy. And for another person, it may reflect a preference for living moments directly alone. The psychology becomes clearer when we stop asking what silence means universally. Instead, we ask what purpose it serves for this person, at this moment, within their relationship with themselves. Because ultimately, posting and not posting are behaviors. The deeper story lies in why we choose to be seen, why we choose to remain unseen, and whose attention we need. Maybe the most revealing thing about people who rarely post is not their silence, but what that silence asks us to reconsider. We have become accustomed to seeing identity displayed everywhere, until privacy itself can seem unusual. Yet a person does not become more real because more people witness them. A moment does not become more meaningful because it receives reactions. And a life does not become fuller simply because it leaves behind more digital evidence. There is something quietly human about keeping certain experiences unannounced, to laugh without recording it, to accomplish something without announcing it, to care about someone without needing everyone else to know. These moments still exist completely. Of course, silence is not automatically wisdom, and posting is not automatically insecurity. Both can come from healthy choices, difficult emotions, habits, or simple preference. What matters is whether the behavior reflects freedom or something that controls us. Perhaps the quietest people are not disappearing from the world, they are reminding us that not everything meaningful needs an audience. Some lives are deeply experienced before they are ever publicly seen. And sometimes, that is enough. Maybe real freedom is knowing you can choose silence or visibility without needing permission. Social media can remain part of life without becoming the place where identity is constantly decided for yourself alone today. When nobody is watching, the question becomes simple. What do you enjoy? What do you value? What feels meaningful when no reaction is waiting afterward? Those answers can reveal hidden parts of yourself within. People who do not post are not necessarily more private, confident, or detached. They are simply human beings making choices from different histories, values, priorities, personal circumstances, individual perspectives, unique experiences, and relationships with attention. And perhaps that is a lesson worth carrying beyond social media. You do not have to document moments to prove you lived it. You do not need an audience for an experience to become meaningful. If this made you see social media, quiet people, or yourself differently, like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more psychology stories exploring the hidden patterns behind everyday human behavior with us.